Tonight on Primetime, a fragile de-escalation is being tested in the Gulf after days of strikes pushed one of the world's most important energy corridors back into crisis. The question now is whether diplomacy can move faster than the next flashpoint. Welcome to the program. I'm Andi Mioč. The United States and Iran have agreed to pause mutual attacks for now and say they will meet in Qatar tomorrow. It comes as tensions over the Strait of Hormuz and the security of shipping in the waterway remain in focus. Let's go to this report for the latest.
Posting on his social media, US President Donald Trump has announced that the United States and Iran are set to hold talks in Doha on Tuesday. The meeting had originally been planned for Switzerland and was expected to focus on Iran's nuclear program. But renewed tensions in the Strait of Hormuz prompted the talks to move to Qatar, with the focus shifting to shipping security. During negotiations in Switzerland a week ago, the two sides agreed to establish a hotline between the US military and Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to coordinate traffic in the strategic waterway. However, Axios reported that the hotline was still not operational as of Saturday. The diplomatic push follows a new round of military exchanges. The United States carried out strikes on Iranian targets on Friday and Saturday, citing what it called continued Iranian aggression against commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran responded by striking US military positions in the region.
Well, to discuss this, we're now joined by Newsweek contributor and political analyst Peter Roth, coming to us from Washington, D.C. Peter, welcome. Great to have you on the program. Let's start with this scheduled meeting in Doha. Can these talks tomorrow put the peace negotiations back on track, do you think?
Hello, and thank you for having me on. I think it's a misnomer to talk about putting the peace negotiations back on track, because I'm not sure they've ever been on track to begin with. I think Iran looks at the negotiations as a delaying tactic that allows it time to rebuild what was destroyed in the most recent military conflict, the radar stations, the drone launching sites, to get more missile launchers, to get more missiles. I'm not really sure that their negotiation is genuine. What they want is ratification of what they perceive to be the gains that they've earned in this conflict, namely the right to enrich uranium, the right to have a nuclear weapon, even though they say they don't want one, and control over the Strait of Hormuz.
In that vein, we've heard the Iranian president today saying that the interim deal that was signed by two sides was a great victory for the Iranian people. Now, with those waivers for sanctions on Iran's oil and petrochemical sectors, would you say he's right?
Well, no, he's not, but not for the same reasons I think that other people would say. I understand sanctions as a diplomatic tool. I understand sanctions as a counter or a different effort than war. But the fact is, when the supreme leader got up this morning, he had bacon and eggs and coffee for breakfast. Most of Iran had nothing, because there are no jobs, inflation's through the roof, there are no consumer goods, they're poor. They're poor in part because of the sanctions. The sanctions don't bother the radicals that run the regime. They're always well fed. They always have gasoline to go places in their vehicles. They always to go. They have money in the bank. Their lives are very different than the people whom they are oppressing. And I think that the sanctions hurt the Iranian people more than they hurt the government. Now, having said that, I prefer them as an alternative to war. And I think if it were possible for the Iranian people to rise up and throw off the chains of their oppressors, they would. But these are ruthless people. You know, they come on and complain that the Americans killed 162 schoolgirls because we bombed a school on the first night that used to be a barracks for the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they won't admit that they've executed 40,000 Iranians who have protested against the government. That's a pretty high bar to get over when you don't have access to weapons if you're going to throw off a tyranny.
Well, Peter, during these 60 days that are set out in the interim deal for talks on trickier issues, let's put it that way, including the enriching of uranium, judging by what we've seen so far, do you believe the two sides can reach an agreement in that time frame?
They can reach an agreement anytime they want to. The question is whether or not they want to. The Americans want an agreement. The Americans want peace. The Americans want Iran to get out of the enrichment business and to forswear the desire to become a nuclear power. And that's not just because that makes Iran the dominant power in the Middle East, but because certain Iranian leaders, including former President Ahmadinejad, have committed to use them as first strike weapons against Israel and the United States, which means the time to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon is before they have one, not after. They've committed, publicly renounced that commitment to use it against the United States. Now, whether they hit the continental United States with a missile or they put a bomb on, sail it into Baltimore Harbor, or they use one of the existing ballistic missiles they have to take out the American naval base in Italy or an American military base in Germany is irrelevant. They have promised to use a nuclear weapon against the United States.
And one other major issue, sorry to interrupt there, Peter, that we've seen at the gas station and on the global markets were the prices of oil. They have come down pretty significantly, erasing all war-related gains. But ship owners remain cautious about transiting the Strait of Hormuz. What do you see as being the most realistic scenario for the strait in the future?
Well, you have to understand a little bit about energy economics to understand what's going on here. And I am not an economist, but to take it down, the price of oil and gasoline is not just on what's happening now, but on what people think is likely to happen in the near future. Whether inventories will rise or inventories will fall. Every time there is an incident that the Strait of Hormuz is going to be open, the price of gas falls. That's because the market expects more gasoline. If there isn't, if there's an announcement Iran bombed a ship, as they just did, and they are screaming that America is cheating on the MOU by taking tankers through what Iran calls Omani territorial waters rather than an international waterway, which is what the Strait of Hormuz is, you'll see the price of gasoline move up a little bit because people are projecting out restrictions. I think that either way, it's important to note that the price is still lower than it was under Biden inflation, under the last administration. These are the world can resolve. And frankly, it's a wake-up call for American who unquestionably goes with the left's attack on President Trump for calling for evaluation of our relationship with NATO.
And finally, Peter, just shortly, please, we're running out of time. How do you see the framework agreement?
Sir, I'm having a little trouble hearing.
All right, can you hear me now?
If you just boost the volume a little bit.
How do you see the framework agreement signed by the U.S., Israel, and Lebanon as fitting into this broader negotiation process?
Well, it's a positive word. There's been an agreement to disarm, that Hezbollah is going to disarm, and that Israel is going to pull Lebanon, which is what everybody wants, including the Israelis. Except that Hezbollah says they won't go along, and that Hezbollah, frankly, isn't party to the deal. There's too much power in Hezbollah, in what it does, to wreck the MOU, to wreck any agreement, without any accountability. Hezbollah isn't at the table. They haven't been invited. I'm not sure that it does any good to have them there. But without them as part of the conversation, they have no accountability. They haven't agreed to anyone. People are agreeing to things on their behalf. And the only ones who can do anything about it is Iran, because Iran stands up Hezbollah. Iran admits that Hezbollah is their resistance ally, their proxy, in the war against what they refer as the Zionist state or the occupiers, or whatever words they use to avoid saying Israel. That Hezbollah is their ally in that war, and they won't abandon them, which means Iran won't tell them to stand down. Now, the Americans have made it clear that the release of the frozen assets are contingent at least upon the nuclear deal and probably on support for the proxies. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has done a terrific job shutting down the networks that are used to move money to the proxy organizations, but it's
Sorry,
not
Peter,
shut down.
We are having
airtight.
some slight connection issues, but thank you kindly for coming on Primetime and sharing your analysis.
I always enjoy being with you. Thank you very much.
Okay, after a short break, we'll take a closer look at Azerbaijan's reaction to Israel's move on the events of 1915 and why Baku says history should not be turned into a political decision. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Azerbaijan's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said the decision by the Israeli government concerning the, quote, so-called Armenian genocide is a matter of serious concern. Baku stressed it was unacceptable to misrepresent the events of 1915 and turn a historical issue into a political decision. The statement added that such steps do not contribute to reconciliation or mutual understanding, but instead deepen existing divisions and undermine efforts to achieve lasting peace in the region. Azerbaijan called on the Israeli government to reconsider its decision. Baku also reaffirmed that it would continue to uphold historical truth, respect the principles of international law, and support efforts to promote lasting peace in the region. Well, joining me now in the studio is A News' Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orhan Amashov. Orhan, always a pleasure to have you in the studio with me. Now, how should we understand the timing and Israel's move? What is it trying to do here?
Thank you, Andy. Always great pleasure to be here and to converse with you regarding a wider range of issues. The timing is the most important thing. although we know that in Israeli society and body politic, there has always been a certain section which always believed that events of 1915 should be recognized as genocide. There has never been the mighty central political vision recognizing events of 1915 in that particular light as an act of ultimate justice. So therefore, timing is incredibly important. Of course, naturally, it at first glance, and this seems to be a considerable body of opinion supported by many analysts, keeping PDI on the regional affairs, is a tit-for-tat action by the Israeli government in relation to what Turkey has been saying about what has been happening in Gaza about the Israeli action. So basically, it's an expression of Israeli disgruntlement in relation to Turkish actions on the ground, perhaps, and also Turkish statements, in particular statements coming from President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. To what extent, I mean, it's another question, should we actually categorize historic events using legal labels, conventional labels? It's another question, we can perhaps discuss it, but to me it sounds like a response to what Turkey has been doing in relation to Israel.
Now that you mentioned Turkey, we got quite a reaction from Ankara, from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. I'll just quote you a snippet here. It says, "The Israeli government, which has been carrying out systematic persecution against the Palestinian people before the eyes of the entire world and is currently before the International Court of Justice in the case concerning the commission of the crime of genocide against Gazans, seeks to cover up its own crimes through the political decision it has adopted regarding the events of 1915. Did you expect such a strong reaction?
I was expecting in stronger language from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. Their understanding is that Israel is doing it in order to detract from its own actions. Well, first of all, there is another question: to what extent? What should be the legal analysis and evaluation of what happened in Gaza? I don't want to touch upon that particular subject, but the reality is that Israel is facing legal challenges at present. Israel, in many ways, is facing these challenges at the International Court of Justice. There's an arrest warrant about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by International Criminal Court. Of course, all of these things are there, and actually one may think that Israeli government is trying to detract from that. But a second, of course, moment is about the political tension between these two countries. Israel could have recognized events of 1915 as genocide 10, 20 years ago, when the relations between Turkey and Israel were not too bad. I mean, we remember 90s, they were very partners. I mean, today we, for Daybreak, interviewed one Israeli commentator. He said that there was one point in 1980s, for example, Turkey, Republic of Turkey, was the only Muslim friend of Israel. And back then, of course, Israel did not take this decision. The impression given is that, first of all, events of 1915 are incredibly contentious. There's no single doubt that there was a massive killing of people of different ethnic backgrounds. But Turkish argument is that around 600 Armenians might have been killed as part of massacres. Turkish argument is that it was a poorly executed deportation. And of course, tragedy of Armenian people should be recognized. At the same time, tragedy of Turkish people who were killed during the fightings and skirmishes there must be honored. And we know that in 1905, 1915, many Azerbaijanis were killed as well as within the different theater adjacent to the Anatolian theater. So basically, we talk about tragedy. But first of all, the Convention on Genocide was adopted later. There's no retrospective application of the definition of genocide to events of 1915. It's incredibly difficult legally to establish genocidal intent in the actions of the government, of Turkish government, back then Ottoman government led by Committee for Union and Progress, because there was a decision on deportation and take care of the actual Armenian population. So basically, genocide is politically loaded, legal term. Applying it retrospectively for the purpose of punishing your adversary does not seem to be a noble course of action, but there is a massive acrimony going on there. The relations between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Turkish President of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, are at the lowest ebb. These two very strong characters definitely dislike each other very much. There's a competition between Israel and Turkey. Turkey has got this foreign policy wherein Turkey naturally wants its footprint in Iraq, in Syria, in line with its own 1920 Misak-ı Milli National Oath policy, wherein it treats those territories as within the sphere of its influence to be able to protect its sovereign national interests. Naturally, Turkey has got its own policy regarding the issue regarding Palestine. They disagree on a number of things, but recognizing it as genocide at this very juncture does seem to be like a political reaction. I'm not very surprised by the parliament, by Turkish foreign minister's reaction. I think it's quite measured, but of course, naturally, there are many other aspects. But it's a very multi-layered issue, of course.
And Orhan, for our viewers, why is this issue so sensitive for Azerbaijan and Turkey?
Well, first of all, if you're accusing any country, irrespective of that country being Turkey and Azerbaijan, of genocide, or Israel, for example, this is a very serious issue. Israel does not like to be accused of genocide. Israel is saying that, well, I'm defending myself, I'm engaged in the act of self-defense. It's very sensitive for Israeli politicians, Israeli body politics, to be accused of genocide. They don't accept genocide label. And naturally, in the same vein, Turkey does not accept this. Azerbaijan does not accept because that part of history is a common history for these two countries. And there were many massacres committed against Azerbaijanis and Turks as well. So singling out one particular development that happened in 1915, when Ottoman Empire, the precursor of modern Republic of Turkey, was at war with Russia and allied forces, when there was a decision to deport local Armenian population from eastern Anatolia to Syria, which was badly executed, of course, deportation, describing the massacres happened during that stage as genocide, which is a term which was naturally developed later after what happened to Jews during the Second World War. Applying that same notion to Turks is of course very degrading to Turkish dignity. In the same way, Israelis feel incredibly dissatisfied when somebody is accusing them of committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza or in West Bank. So naturally the term is very sensitive. And also, I mean, if today you're accusing somebody of genocide, tomorrow some legal obligation and claims may emerge as well. I mean, this has been the tool in the hands of many detractors of Turkey to institute this particular policy, but it has always backfired. I mean, and also, allow me to talk about the Turkish-Armenian normalization. Today's Armenian government, to the detriment of the interests of the Armenian diaspora and some other elements in Russia, is not pursuing the policy of genocide recognition as part of the Turkish-Armenian normalization. Because naturally, according to Armenian constitution, the preamble of Armenian constitution, with which Azerbaijan has its own problems for very obvious reasons, there's a term called Western Armenia. And that term Western Armenia is directly connected with the genocide claims. And Armenia and Turkey practically are sorting out this problem. They will have a normalization once Azerbaijani-Armenian normalization does reach logical conclusion. When Israel, at this very sensitive juncture, when Prime Minister Pashinyan defeated his detractors on the 7th of June, when he's actively talking about a reconciliation with Turkey, the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, at a time when it's, I don't want to use any particular label in relation to the Israeli government. Israel is really fighting existential fight against its enemies. There's no single doubt about that. But at the time when sensitivities prevailed and high up in the air, accusing the Turkish government or actually adopting a decision unilaterally, unanimously by the cabinet to recognize events of 1950 when Israel was not in existence and there was no term genocide applicable to any developments happening around the world, or Turkey, just because the relations are really bad, does not look like a very helpful action. It does put Israel's true friends, and Azerbaijan, in my judgment, according to my understanding, there's a huge sympathy towards the cause of Israel, towards its challenges, puts this country in a difficult position. And hence the commentary coming from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Azerbaijan today, which I think was very clear, unequivocal, and also, of course, very measured as well. It puts Azerbaijan in a difficult position. It puts everybody who in the wider Turkic world and Muslim world want to make sure Israel has good relations with its neighbors in a very difficult and precarious position.
And building on that, Orhan, you've said it, a true friend. Baku obviously has an important relationship with Israel, but it's also a very close ally of Turkey. How does Baku balance such diplomatic moments usually?
Baku's alliance with Turkey is absolutely there. Shusha Declaration was signed back in June 2021, and then it was ratified by two parliaments, and now it's an international treaty. Any attack against Azerbaijan is an attack against Turkey, and by attack we don't just mean the military attack, but also attacks of this nature is also perceived by Azerbaijan as something being directed at it indirectly, however indirectly and remote, but still there's an Azerbaijani interest at stake as well. There's an Armenian interest as well, because Armenia should not naturally be interested in this in line with Prime Minister Pashinyan's policies. it puts Azerbaijan in a difficult position. President Aliyev made this point very clear a year ago. He said that, well, Israel is our friend, is our strategic partner. It's a very valuable relationship because it's not just about Israel providing Azerbaijan with weaponry, Azerbaijan selling oil to Israel. The oil business is a very complicated. Azerbaijan is not selling oil to Israel. It so happens that certain percentage of Azerbaijani oil is actually part of Israeli energy landscape. The nature of the business there is quite different. It's also about affinity. It's about the protection of Jewish communities around the world. Azerbaijan is a country which has been fighting against any form of Islamophobia and also anti-Semitism. What Azerbaijan can do, there are limited things Azerbaijan can do. The commentary by the Foreign Office was incredibly measured. Effectively said that it's a matter of serious concern. There was no word strongly condemn, if you see. Those things matter. Not because Azerbaijan naturally strongly condemns it, but the language is very measured, and the language there says that it's a distortion of historical truths, and it will not serve any dignified purpose, it will not serve reconciliation and so forth. What Azerbaijan can do at this juncture, perhaps in the past when there was a tension between Israel and Turkey in Syria, Azerbaijan did host talks between these two countries. So Azerbaijan could still help, but with the tensions escalating between Turkey and Israel, with a very bad language being employed, I'm not entirely sure what Azerbaijan can realistically do. Azerbaijan can act in a very reasonable way, limiting the damage. Sort of limiting the damage emanating from that clash could be one option. And one of our guests today, who was a guest of Daybreak, said that Azerbaijan could host a trilateral format between Israel and Turkey. I don't think that is indeed a distinct possibility, but perhaps some back-channel diplomacy might come to help, perhaps. But I'm not very optimistic about what can be done, because after all, it's entirely up to these two nations which have found themselves in this very difficult situation. Allow me to just clarify the point. What happened in 1915 was incredibly tragic. Turks were killed, Armenians were killed, certain Kurdish, people of Kurdish ethnicity were killed during the events of 1915. It was a dramatic moment. Ottoman Empire, precursor of modern Turkey, was fighting existential battle against its enemies, against Britain, France, and Russia. These people were deported. Sadly, there was a mass killing of many, many Armenians. According to Turkish figures, around 600,000, but also Turks were killed. Describing something of that nature as a genocide today, in 2026, at a time when your own diplomatic relation with this country at its lowest ebb, gives rise to many questions. I'm afraid the answer to this question does not reveal anything positive.
And Orhan, in this situation, as it is right now, do you see this as having potential to escalate to a wider diplomatic issue?
Well, I think, despite all of the problems between these two countries, the intelligence echelons within both countries have always pursued a policy of de-escalation. Turkey and Israel have got common interests in many areas. They've got common interests in many ways in Syria. They compete there and they cooperate there. Regarding containing dangerous form of Iran, they have been forming alliance, despite the current reality, which seems a bit different. So I think that the common sense will prevail at some point. I think there are massive problems when we look at it from the perspective of personalities. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu have been accusing Turkey of all sorts of things. Because when Turkey accuses, and President Erdogan using incredibly strong language, accusing Israel of committing genocide, using very, very strong language, to put it mildly, in relation to Prime Minister Netanyahu, with some other Israeli politicians talking about Turkey being next target after Iran. One thinks that things are completely out of control, but I think that these two countries, two really important powers in the Middle East, should come to terms at a certain stage. And I think the United States of America could play an important role in this. Well, Azerbaijan could play its own role in terms of providing a platform for these two countries to come together, but Israel, the United States, is naturally, in particular this particular administration, must be interested, and I'm sure is interested, in having this balance between Israel and Turkey, because Israel is their key ally in the Middle East, but its ally which should always be curbed in a sense. And Turkey is a reliable ally, is a member of NATO. It's very independent, of course, but having such a valuable, powerful ally there, because Turkey and the United States, when it matters, they always agree on the principal issues. When Turkey acts independently, US does recognize it as an act of will and a national interest. I think with the US help, with the help of some of the regional actors, perhaps what today appears to be major escalation will be curbed. And I'm in favor of the theory in line with which this escalation will reach a point and then it will de-escalate accordingly. That's my fundamental point, because realpolitik comes first.
Orhan, thank you very much for joining me here in the studio and dissecting the issue for us.
Thank you very much.
All right, after a short break, we will look at the latest cross-border fighting between Pakistan and Afghanistan. Don't go away. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Pakistani security forces say they've carried out a ground operation along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border on Sunday, killing 29 fighters. Pakistan's information minister said on social media that the action was launched in response to multiple militant attacks across the country. The operation comes a day after the country said militants attacked the regional headquarters of the paramilitary Rangers in Karachi, killing 3 soldiers. Let's get the latest from Kabul now, as A News' Tamim Bahis sent us this report.
Afghanistan condemns the recent strikes by Pakistan after officials say several areas in the eastern provinces of Paktia and Kunar were hit late on Sunday night, killing civilians. According to Hamdullah Fitrat, the deputy spokesman of Afghanistan's government, at least 38 people were killed and 163 others injured so far. He says the casualties include women and children. Pakistan, however, says its operation was aimed at militant hideouts along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Pakistani officials confirm its security forces carried out a ground operation followed by airstrikes targeting Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan or TTP positions. Large quantities of weapons and ammunition were destroyed, according to Pakistan's Information Minister Ataullah Tarar on social media on Monday. Islamabad says 29 militants were killed and describes the action as a response to recent attacks inside Pakistan, including an assault on a paramilitary Rangers facility in Karachi. Pakistan repeatedly says militants use Afghan soil to launch attacks across the border, accusing Kabul of harboring militants. An allegation Kabul denies, saying the militancy is Pakistan's internal problem. Tensions between the two neighbors remain high, with fears of further escalation along the frontier. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, to help us understand the political implications of these latest developments between Afghanistan and Pakistan, I'm joined now by Ashfaq Ahmed, the chairman at the Department of International Relations at the University of Sargodha, Punjab in Pakistan. Ashfaq, thank you so much for joining us on Prime Time. Now, after the Pakistani strikes, the Taliban said those strikes targeted civilians and not militants. How serious can this latest escalation prove to be?
Thank you for having me. I will break your question into 3 portions. The first is that why these attacks were carried out by Pakistan security forces or ground operations. So the point is that there had been attack on Pakistani paramilitary forces or Rangers in Karachi. It's a metropolitan coastal city. So that was attacked by Afghan-backed terrorists. So in response to that, our Pakistan security forces, they launched the attack. So that's the first portion. The second portion is that whenever Pakistan carried out strikes against Afghan targets or the terrorist target inside Afghanistan, they claim that there had been civilians and those civilians were killed. So if you apply cognitive warfare theory on this particular claim that Taliban are having, it is to frame the minds of the audience, both the domestic audience and the international audience. Why domestic audience? Because they want to recruit more and more terrorists there so that they can be sent to Pakistan. And so that's the one portion. As far as the international audience is concerned, they want to bring Pakistan under pressure on the basis of human rights violation from the United Nations Security Council or United Nations in general, the United States itself, and the European Union. So that was the second portion of your question. The third portion of your question is that what can be the future of this escalation? So if we talk about the escalation, we have seen the similar pattern first in 2022 and then 2024, and now this is the third round of this bilateral conflict. So what happened is that whenever there is a terrorist attack inside Pakistan, Pakistan security forces, they carry out again a strike inside militant against militant hideouts inside Afghanistan. So in response, Afghan Taliban, they sent suicide bombers to carry out suicide attacks on Pakistan security forces convoys or Pakistan security forces apparatus. So this is the pattern which is set for the past few years.
And Ashfaq, talks between Islamabad and Kabul have fallen through since that ceasefire that was mediated by Turkey and Qatar last October. What are the key sticking points for Islamabad and for Kabul?
Okay, so first we talk about the key point, the key sticking points for Islamabad. So this entire situation, or this entire scenario, is security driven for Pakistan, and Pakistan believes that there is a nexus between Afghan Taliban, the TTP terrorists, and the Indian intelligence agency, because Indians, they believe in Chanakya Kautilia's strategy, which says that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Ajit Dole, who is the National Security Advisor of India, he has repeatedly on various forums, he has said that they will join hands with anyone who they can use against Pakistan. So we arrest our Pakistan security forces. They in the past we arrested Indian serving naval officials. So the point I'm trying to make is that there's Indian factor which is involved, and the recent militant attacks which was carried out in Karachi, Pakistan security forces believe, or Pakistani government believe, that it was backed by India. So that is the first issue. The second point for Pakistan is that we want to fence the border, and under General Kayani, Ashfaq Parvez Kayani, Pakistan fenced the entire Pak-Afghan border, or most of the area of Pak-Afghan border. And why we did it? Because David Gulula, he is the father of counterinsurgency. In 1960, he stated that if you want to get rid of the counterinsurgents, if you want to have a successful counterinsurgency and you want to get rid of the terrorists, you need to fence the porous borders. So once we, fenced the borders, there had been a decline in terrorist attacks. But after Taliban came to power, they destroyed majority or most portions of the fence, and now terrorists, they can easily infiltrate into Pakistan. They carry attacks inside Pakistan. So Pakistan, second point for Pakistan is that they want to fence the border with Afghanistan, which Afghanistan denies. And the third point is that we, or Pakistan government, it has tried to convince the Afghan Taliban that they should differentiate between Afghan Taliban and the TTP, which they are not ready, because Afghan Taliban, they believe that TTP is their ideological brother or offshoot. And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, for them, or for the Kabul, the sticking point is, first of all, they do not believe that there's a Durand line, because the Durand line, demarcate, or it set the borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan, which was created by British Empire in 1893. So they do not believe in that, and they keep on raising this particular issue. So that's the first issue. The second issue is that they do not want Pakistan to launch attack inside Afghanistan against terrorist hideouts or TTP hideouts. So that is the second issue. And these are the issues both on Pakistan side and Afghanistan side.
And Ashfaq, there's a major process right now underway that Islamabad is helping mediate the U.S.-Iran negotiations. Can this renewed fighting affect Pakistan's role?
So let's go back to February, when there had been mediation between Pakistan and Afghanistan with the help of Chinese negotiators, and a peace agreement was reached. A fragile peace agreement was reached, and on 28th of February, the war between U.S. and Iran, that was started. So the point is that both Pakistan and Afghanistan, they were involved in conflict-like situation, and parallel to that, Pakistan was also mediating between Iran and United States of America on the other hand. So I don't see that these border clashes, or between the fight or the conflict between Afghanistan and Pakistan, can affect the mediation process between U.S. and Iran, which is facilitated by Pakistan. However, there have been several, repercussions for Pakistan. For example, I personally believe that President Trump, he did not visit Pakistan because of the security issue that was created by Afghan Taliban. So the high level of visit by President Trump, that was delivered perhaps because of this particular issue. And the second is that Islamabad MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding between the United States of America and Iran, which was signed in Geneva, was also because of the security issues. So that is my perspective.
And Ashfaq, you've spoken about the accusations that Islamabad has against Kabul that it's harboring militants who then conduct terrorist attacks inside Pakistan. What does the other side say? Do they have some counterclaims? Do they back that up with any arguments?
Whenever Pakistan raised the issue that there are militants inside Afghanistan, so Afghani, Taliban, they raised the issue of ISK, that ISK is based in Pakistan. So that is a counterclaim which has been made by the Taliban. However, if you look at the independent, bodies, for example, United Nations Security Council, it has also mentioned in its report in December 2025 that there are a good number of Al-Qaeda hardcore militants, perhaps from 300 to 500 hardcore militants of Al-Qaeda are based or having safe sanctuaries in Afghanistan. And moreover, if you talk about United States Department of Defense reports, it has also indicated that there are different transnational terrorist organizations, for example, ETM or East Turkestan Movement, Jamaatul Ansarullah, and then we have Al-Qaeda in Indian subcontinent. So these are the terrorist organizations according to Department of Defense of the United States. And moreover, if you read the reports which has been submitted by National Counterterrorism Center of United States of America, it also indicates that there are transnational actors, terrorist actors are present in Afghanistan. And moreover, General Eric, he was the CENTCOM Commander-in-Chief, and back in 2024, he also, in his testimony before the U.S. Congress, he mentioned that ISK is present in Afghanistan, and ISK from Afghanistan may launch major terrorist attacks against Western allies, U.S. Western allies, and U.S. Different centers or different the presence that U.S. has around Afghanistan.
Ashfaq, thank you so much for coming on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis.
Thank you for having me.
All right, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the wider implications of Israel's actions in its region. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Israeli troops moved further into the western part of Syria's Doha province on Sunday, with military vehicles entering the area and new positions being established, according to local sources. Another military site is also being set up near the village of Abdin. The latest deployment comes as Israel continues regular air raids and ground operations, particularly in the southern provinces, since the removal of Bashar al-Assad from power in late 2024. Israel says it has destroyed a Hezbollah underground facility in southern Lebanon, saying it contained hundreds of weapons and launchers. Israel's military released a video, it says, shows explosions in the village of Majd al-Zoun in southern Lebanon. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israeli forces destroyed what they described as a 200-meter underground site that they say was used by Hezbollah. According to the statement, the United States was informed before the operation. Well, joining me now from Jerusalem is Flor Hassan Nahum, Israeli Foreign Ministry Special Envoy and former Deputy Mayor of Jerusalem. Flor, welcome. Great to have you on Primetime.
Thank you. Good evening.
If you don't mind, let's start with the framework agreement that was signed by the U.S., Israel, and Lebanon. How big of a step would you say that is? And can it in any way affect the broader negotiations that the U.S. is having with Iran?
It's a huge step. I mean, we have been here before, but I think this is the first time that we can say that the Lebanese government have decided that their enemy is not Israel. Their enemy is Hezbollah, which is an occupying force of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that is a huge step. The people of Lebanon want peace with Israel. All that this jihadi proxy of the Islamic Republic of Iran has brought them is death and destruction. They have taken over their country. They have taken over their economy. They have brought terror to their country. And what they're looking for now is peace and normalization. And so this agreement is very, very significant. It's only the beginning, but I think it's the beginning of good things.
And would you say it can impact the broader U.S.-Iranian negotiations, perhaps?
Well, you know, the Islamic Republic of Iran are trying very hard to link themselves to Hezbollah. We all know that Hezbollah are funded by the Islamic Republic, and they want to use this as an excuse for perhaps breaching the agreement with the United States. But the United States, you know, understand the game very well. They know that this is what they're trying to do. There is no linkage, and there will be no linkage as long as the rockets keep firing into Israel from Hezbollah. As long as Hezbollah, a terrorist organization, does not disarm, then Israel will have to remain in the position that it's in right now.
And we saw a fair share of criticism in Israel over the U.S.-Iran memorandum, interim deal, however you'd like to call it. To what extent was the Israeli society taken aback by the memorandum?
Well, I think that people in general were disappointed that the United States believe that you can negotiate with this very toxic terror regime that has killed 42,000 of its own people. I completely understand why the United States want to try diplomacy. They tried it last year. They tried it earlier on this year before the war, and they're trying it again. They're really giving the Islamic Republic of Iran a chance to do the right thing, to disarm their nuclear weapons, to get rid of their nuclear ambitions. They're trying hard. And in Israel, because we've been under existential threat from this regime for decades, we really don't have any faith that they will actually comply with the agreement.
Well, following some of those criticisms, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance publicly scolded Israeli officials, saying that Donald Trump was the only world leader still sympathetic to Israel. We heard Trump's very direct remarks regarding Netanyahu, at times expletive-laden. How much daylight is there right now between Israel's government and the Trump administration?
I think that any type of announcements or any type of information about divisions between the US and Israel are not as serious as people want to make them out to be. We're allies. We have interests in common, and we have different interests in many ways, and that's pretty normal. We've just fought a war together. The militaries are in daily touch. We're working together in this region. The Prime Minister and President Trump have a good relationship, yes, and there are moments when allies disagree on certain things, and there are moments when people say things and exaggerate. I don't think that the United States is the only country in the world that appreciates or supports Israel. There's many other countries, but certainly it's the most important country that supports Israel.
And Flor, would you say that some of those differences are becoming more apparent as the midterm election in the United States and the elections in Israel are coming up?
Well, I'm not sure that the elections in Israel, a good electoral campaign, a good electoral strategy is divisions between Israel and America. Maybe it is for President Trump because he's facing some isolationists in his own party. We'll have to see what happens with that. But ultimately, we are strong allies that believe that the civilizational threat is toxic Islamic fundamentalism.
And finally, Flor, with messages from Israeli ministers, officials, that the security zone in Lebanon will remain. Do you expect Washington to try and exert pressure for an Israeli withdrawal if it deems it necessary to end the Iran war?
Well, they may assert pressure, but Israel is a sovereign country. We have the right to defend our territory. We have that security zone because the residents of northern Israel have not been able to live normal lives now for almost 3 years, since the 8th of October 2023. The Americans understand this, and they have not asked Israel to withdraw from the yellow line that we've created. That is the line that, in fact, the UN also imposed on Hezbollah twice with Resolution 1701, and they have not complied. The UN so-called peacekeepers have not been able to do their job, and so nobody's asking Israel to remove itself from the yellow line, certainly not America. They understand our issues with Hezbollah. They understand that they're infringing on our sovereignty, and Israel will do what it needs to do to defend its citizens.
Flora, thank you kindly for joining us on Primetime and
Thank
sharing
you.
your views. Coming up, we look at Serbia's deepening political crisis as President Aleksandar Vučić's resignation pledge fails to end protests on the streets. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Serbia's political crisis is deepening after President Aleksandar Vučić said he would resign within weeks. But protesters remain on the street, with many questioning whether the move marks a real exit or a political reset. Thousands have rallied in recent days, including in Kraljevo and Novi Sad, demanding early elections and accountability. The protests were sparked by the 2024 railway station collapse in Novi Sad, which killed 16 people and fueled anger over alleged corruption. Some protesters fear Vučić could step down as president, but still retain influence through another political role. Well, joining me now is Ognjen Petronijević, an independent researcher joining us from Milan, Italy. Ognjen, welcome. Always great to have you on the show. From a European perspective, how significant is this moment for Serbia?
First of all, thank you so much, Andy, for having me. It's always a pleasure to discuss all of these political developments with you on Prime Time. Well, to answer your question, this could signify a critical political point for Serbian politics. This depends on whether the announcement was made genuinely and whether it only represents a genuine will for the elections, or it represents rather a political play by the president of Serbia. The resignation announcement comes after months of unprecedented political pressure that was driven by the student-led protests. Besides openly advocating for transparency, democratic reforms, and accountability, the protests also demanded early elections. And this is, so to say, their understanding of a way out of the political crisis caused by the combination of government mismanagement and corruption, which led to the collapse of the railway station canopy in the city of Novi Sad. It goes without saying that Europe has closely monitored the recent developments. Serbia, as EU candidate states, remains an important factor for European Western Balkans policy agenda. The issues of democratic backsliding, foreign policy alignment, lack of media freedoms, independency of judiciary have sparked a very limited engagement by the EU in the previous months. Despite all of these issues, some of the top EU officials in Brussels still consider Vučić to be an only reasonable political actor in Serbian political landscape. They have been neglecting the democratic commitments that the student movement have been making, and this is what I see as a central issue. To conclude and to answer your question, if the announcement leads to early elections in Serbia, Serbia can expect to experience one of the most important political moments in over a decade. However, if it is a political play by President Vučić, the real moment will come in 2027 when the legal deadline for the elections will come.
Ognjen, do you believe that Vucic's resignation pledge could calm the protesters, or could it actually raise more questions about what's coming next?
Andy, I don't believe the resignation pledge will calm the protests. If anything, it will open even more questions about the political process that will follow. Until now, President Vučić has avoided giving a clear electoral timetable. And this is very, very important because I think he kind of implements this strategy of ambiguity and uncertainty, likely because elections under the current political climate, under the current political situation, carry much greater uncertainty for the ruling party. If we pay attention to what he said, he offered only a general statement that he would resign within weeks. This leaves many unanswered questions. When exactly when he stepped down? When can we expect the elections to be held? Who will be the next candidate for president? Does this also mean parliamentary elections? Is this the start of the campaign? These are all the questions we need answers to, and Vučić has not provided them. With the state of affairs, there is a lot of room for political maneuvering in Serbian political landscape. It allows the government to observe how the opposition develops, whether the student movement can transform itself into an organized political force, and how the potential coalition building unfolds before making his official next move. It is precisely because of this why the public has still not taken the resignation announcement seriously. When the call for early election becomes official, this will be a very decisive moment for the Serbian opposition and for the Serbian student movement to finally openly take an active engagement in Serbian elections and in Serbian political life.
Protesters have been calling for early elections and accountability for months now. How closely is the European Union watching this unfold in a candidate country, and do you believe it will take even a closer look with everything still fluid in motion?
Thank you so much for that question, and it is very important. I have been criticizing European approach towards student movements, towards the Serbian crisis in the past months. They have been following developments in Serbia very closely. It is that's not a secret, obviously. Over the past year, European institutions have repeatedly expressed concerns about the issues of rule of law, the issues in electoral conditioning, in media freedoms, in corruption, and also police brutality. These concerns just unfortunately remained declarative. There has not been a lot of active engagement to solve all of these issues. However, recently we have seen somewhat stronger tone from the parts of the European Parliament. Some members of the European Parliament have argued that financial assistance should be more closely linked to democratic freedoms. And this mimics the approach European Union had towards Viktor Orban, for example. Other MEPs have openly criticized President Vucic's resignation strategy, suggesting that it will resemble a tactic that was used by some other populistic leaders, like, for example, Vladimir Putin, who tries to maintain power by changing institutional positions without making any significant change. Questions surrounding voter registration, the independency of media regulatory bodies, the fairness of elections have been part of the ongoing dialogue between Brussels and Belgrade. But what I consider also very important, and in which section that the European Union has made some decisive steps, is definitely in reversing the legislative procedure behind the efforts of the Serbian government to trap and capture judiciary as it is. there have been efforts to completely crack down on the independent judiciary in Serbia. And I think that Europe, through the Venetian Commission, has made some very decisive steps in stopping or reversing the process in Serbia. And I definitely salute those kind of efforts. And I hope for more engagement in this way.
You know, Serbia has long balanced relations with the EU, Russia, and China. Could this political uncertainty affect that balancing act?
I don't expect Serbia's foreign policy orientation to change dramatically overnight. Serbia has long pursued what is often described as the four-pillar foreign policy, which essentially means balancing relation between European Union, the United States, Russian Federation, and China. This approach definitely predates President Vučić. It derives from even Yugoslav approach and post Milosevic governments, and it definitely reflects Serbia's geopolitical position that also has these historical roots. If we were to assume a student-led political party would win in the elections, my assessment that nothing would essentially change becomes even more realistic, since the movement itself is consisted of a diverse plethora of ideological components that are definitely central in the ideologically from an ideological perspective. So this student movement is consisted of far-right intellectuals, of pro-European individuals, people with strong sympathy for Russia. On the other hand, the relation with China will become a strategic and economic necessity in the future, so I don't think that will change either. What could change after the elections is the emphasis. A new government may place greater priority on European integration and democratic reforms, for example, while still maintaining a pragmatic economic cooperation with China. So the real question is not whether Serbia abandons this four-pillar foreign policy, or if it abandons one pillar for another. The real question is which partnership will become central to the new government.
And Ogden, finally, what should Europe be watching now? Is it the street protests, the election timetable, or whether Vučić remains influential from another role?
If I had to choose one priority for Europe right now, it will undoubtedly be the elections. Everything else ultimately depends on whether Serbia is able to hold genuine, free, and fair elections that meet basic international democratic standards. Taking into consideration the nature of EU engagement, which we discussed previously, it has been characterized by a very limited and careful approach that prioritizes stability, and this creates a real risk that without stronger and more consistent pressure on Vučić from outside, the external pressure from not only European Union but also other international organizations, without this pressure, Serbia could dive deeper into the authoritarian rule. At the same time, Europe needs to pay significantly more attention to the student movement and the broader civic protest wave. These groups are the pillar of democratic reforms that are definitely one of the central points of European Union, of alignment with European Union. And if Europe still considers the foreign policy potential of, the student movement making some alignments with other great powers that are competing with Europe, as I described previously, this is just a very similar approach that Vučić will have. And these movements need to definitely have more attention from the European Union. And this is what I have been calling for. And I hope that in the future, if the elections come, this shift of focus from external actors will actually come down to students.
Ogden, thank you very much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your analysis.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let's now go to Belgrade and Aleksandar Đorđević, public relations and media consultant, coming to us from the Serbian capital. Aleksandar, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Now, you were in the country when Vučić announced he would resign. What's the mood like in Serbia right now? Do people see this as a major political turning point?
Well, thank you for having me here. It's quite interesting to talk to the people like 3,000 miles away. But yes, I was here. His announcement is something that we've been hearing for years. First, in maybe 12 years ago, he said he wouldn't be running for president, and then he ran. So nowadays, after so many years, whatever he says is taken with as the British would say, with a pinch of salt. And this announcement is quite a pinch of salt, because his mandate is running out, I think, sometime next year. He doesn't need to resign. He can wait for his mandate to end and then organize elections on various levels, all levels, whichever way he feels he can do it, because he's basically running the show. We're living in an authoritarian regime in which one person does anything.
And Aleksandar, why would you say that his resignation pledge hasn't calmed the protests?
Well, because nobody believes it. It's very simple.
Very simple, short, and concise. And how much of this entire thing, this protest movement, is still about the Novi Sad tragedy, and how much has it become a much wider, deeper protest against a political system?
It started off as a very simple and tragic thing after the people were killed in Novi Sad with the fall of the canopy. And then it simply blew out. It blew up. It snowballed. And then it turned into something that nobody expected. I think he and the current regime were the last people who expected something like this to blow out of control and let alone last so long. And now I think this is sort of generating kind of an opposition feeling within the country, where people who might not have been interested in politics are now saying like, okay, this is too much. There were a lot of these pardons of people who almost killed students, who attacked them, who drove cars into them, and he simply just pardoned these people from being prosecuted. And I think that's really driving people a little bit, how would I say it, mad. We don't want to live in this type of a country.
And Aleksandar,
where criminals are being pardoned.
From a public messaging point of view, how is Vučić trying to frame this to his supporters?
Well, he's using all kinds of methods. Today, I just watched a press conference which was completely out of this world. He was reading medicaments and talking for like almost 15, 20 minutes about the prices of medicaments for heart diseases, for, I don't know, whatever, skin cancer being lowered. The guy's taken over the role of the Minister of Health. He's completely out of this world, and now it's obvious that he has entered deeply into a pre-election campaign, and now he's talking about pensioners getting 10%, 20%, police getting 30% raise of their salaries, prices of medicaments going down. It's obvious that something is coming up, but now they're kind of like building this budgetary This kind of like I don't know, I don't know what I will call it, like budgetary spending on basic things which hit home, but I'm not sure how many people are going to buy this any longer. We've been seeing this kind of stuff for a decade back. Most of it backfired, or nothing happened, like the Belgrade Underground Railway. So I don't know. We'll see.
And Alexander,
We'll have a couple of weeks ahead of us to figure out whether his promise is good or whether it's another hoax.
what do you believe happens next in Serbia? Is it an early election? Is it more protests? Maybe a political reset of sorts?
Well, I think the protests will continue in various forms and types. The students and the citizens, because we have two different groups of protesters who, although they're working together, will continue. But I don't expect anything major in the time being until he decides, or whoever decides, to possibly call for the elections. Once the elections are called, then it's going to be a completely different ballgame.
Alexander, thank you so much for
Then we
joining
will
us
see
on
who is
Primetime.
where.
Thank you so much.
Thank you too.
All right, after a short break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Don't go away. Welcome back to Primetime. The race to shape Britain's next political chapter is moving beyond Westminster. Andy Burnham has used a major speech in Manchester to argue that power, growth, and opportunity must be rebuilt from the regions up. Zainab Farajzadeh reports from Manchester.
UK lawmaker Andy Burnham set out a new vision for Britain in his first major speech since launching his Labour leadership campaign, calling for power to be devolved away from Westminster and for living standards to be raised. Speaking in Manchester, Burnham said Britain needs a circuit breaker after years of political instability and stagnant living standards, arguing that Westminster hasn't been working for people for a very long time. He said Britain is one of the most over-centralized countries in the world, with Westminster and Whitehall in need of radical change. The centerpiece of his plan is the creation of a No 10 No's, a prime ministerial office based in Manchester, which is said will become the no center of a revived Britain, redistributing power and resources across the UK. Burnham said he wants to bring the Greater Manchester Way to Westminster, replacing political conflict with collaboration between government, businesses, communities, and trade unions. He described the approach as Manchesterism, saying growth should be built from the bottom up, backed by investment in infrastructure, housing, and good jobs. He also pledged what he described as the biggest council house building program since the post-war period, saying Britain has lost almost 1.5 million council homes since the 1980s, leaving similar numbers on housing waiting lists. Talking about cabinet appointments, Burnham said he would only make them if he becomes prime minister, but promised an inclusive team representing both the party and the country. Burnham is currently the only declared candidate to take over from Keir Starmer and could be made prime minister next month. Zainab Farajzadeh, News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
France may be feeling cooler after days of extreme heat, but the temperature is still rising politically. The government is now under pressure over its handling of the heat wave and its readiness for the next one. Ross Cullen reports.
Well, the heat wave that's been battering a lot of Europe has now passed through France. It's noticeably much cooler, it's noticeably much more comfortable, but the political heat is continuing to be applied by the opposition on the government. Multiple opposition parties accusing the government of Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu of inaction, of incompetence, of failing to prepare properly for the impacts of the heat wave. There are also growing calls across multiple sectors of society for an accelerated introduction of air conditioning, especially in care homes and in schools. Last week, hundreds of thousands of pupils had to sit their exams outside, with more time being allowed for each exam so children could take regular hydration breaks. Also, 1,000 excess deaths because of the heat wave, an additional 1,000 fatalities that would not have occurred had France not been hit with unseasonably high temperatures. Across the elderly demographic, but also young people, especially being caught up in the spate of drownings here in France. And we do know that there is another heat wave on the way, scheduled to arrive in the middle of July. And so the Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, will come under pressure now to ensure that there is a proper plan in place to deal with the next wave of heat here in France. Ross Cullen, A News, Paris.
Europe's search for new partners is putting the Caucasus and Central Asia in sharper focus. At the InMerge Innovation Summit, leaders and innovators are looking at how technology, talent, and investment can build stronger links between the regions. Katie Wilson is there and has all the details.
Guten Tag aus Berlin. We are here at the InMerge Innovation Summit. Now, the first panel session is going on right behind me now, so we do have to be a bit quiet. This is the third leg of a tour of summits that have spanned across Istanbul, Tashkent, and of course, this is the European leg. So the emphasis here is on Europe and about building bridges between European markets and the emerging markets in Azerbaijan, in the Caucasus, and in Central Asia. Now, the panel behind me is discussing the opportunities that we have currently for this region to emerge as a partner with Europe. Previously, Europe's biggest partner in the region was Russia, but of course, following the invasion of Ukraine, Russia has closed off. So there is big opportunities here for Caucasus, Central Asian countries to build partnerships with Europe, and that is the focus of this summit. Today we've been hearing about leadership, and we've also been hearing about why Berlin is a fitting host city for this, as it's so often and historically been at the intersection between East and West. Now, we've been speaking to the organisers and attendees of this summit about their thoughts. Let's hear what they had to say.
So the region up till now has been not discovered, I want to say, although it's very rich in human potential, amazing tech skills, not so expensive, and then culturally not so far away, and it's very easy to integrate, culturally solutions and teams together. So we believe that now is the timing to build those bridges and let them work.
So I think maybe the overall key message that I'm taking away, not just from my talk, but from all of them, is that, in this age of AI, of technology, of efficiency, being truly knowing yourself as a human and using that as a strength in how you relate to others is a key thing going forward.
This is Katie Wilson, Ilke Metiev and Nazrin Gazimova reporting for A News from Berlin in Germany.
Georgia's push to strengthen its role as a bridge between Asia and Europe is back in focus as Prime Minister Irakli Kobahidze visits Kazakhstan. The talks are expected to center on trade, energy, and the fast-growing Middle Corridor. Nini Nikolaishvili reports.
Irakli Kobahidze touched down in Astana this morning, where he was greeted by Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev at the Independence Palace, followed by government-level talks with Prime Minister Olzas Bektenov, with ministers from both countries around the table. The relationship between Tbilisi and Astana has been growing steadily, and the figures back that up. Bilateral trade rose by 35% in the first 5 months of this year alone, and that growth has not happened by accident. It's been driven by a shared strategic interest. the Middle Corridor, the Trans-Caspian trade route linking China with Europe while bypassing Russia. Georgia and Kazakhstan are two of its most important hubs, and both governments have invested heavily in expanding these routes. Last year, Kazakhstan opened a new container terminal at Poti Port, its first infrastructure project on Georgian soil, as part of more than $600 million in Kazakh investment in Georgia. Energy ties run just as deep. Kazakh oil already flows west through the Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan pipeline, and there is growing momentum behind plans for a green energy corridor linking Central Asian renewable power to European markets via the Black Sea. If realized, it would further strengthen Georgia's role as a key transit hub. What makes today's visit particularly significant is the size and seniority of the delegation Kobakhidze has brought with him. Ministers responsible for foreign affairs, the economy, agriculture, and the environment are all taking part, effectively turning the visit into a working session between the two governments. That is not routine diplomacy. It reflects how central this partnership has become for Georgia at a time when Tbilisi is actively diversifying its economic relationships and looking east as well as west. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Trade relations between Uzbekistan and the United States have received another boost after both sides agreed on a package of measures aimed at expanding market access and strengthening investment cooperation. The announcement follows trade talks in Tashkent as Uzbekistan continues its bid to join the World Trade Organization. Sevil Rajapova has more.
The United States says it will not introduce any additional tariffs on Uzbek exports beyond those already provided under U.S. legislation. And Uzbekistan says it will offer a favorable tariff regime for a broad range of American industrial and agricultural products. That's according to Uzbekistan's Special Representative on the World Trade Organization Affairs, Azizbek Urunov. The latest agreements come after Washington's Trade Representative Jameson Greer recently visited Tashkent, where he held talks with President Shavkat Mirziyoyev and senior government officials. Bilateral negotiations with the United States concluded in late 2024, after 14 months of discussions with Washington reaffirming its support for Uzbekistan's goal of completing the WTO accession process by the end of this year. The two sides also agreed to strengthen investment cooperation and continue negotiations on a broader trade and investment agreement expected to deepen economic ties between the two countries. The discussions build on growing economic cooperation between the two countries. Tashkent International Investment Forum, hosted 2 weeks ago, attracted more than 10,000 participants. Investment agreements worth a record $43 billion were signed, underscoring Uzbekistan's effort to attract foreign capital and expand international partnerships. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
China and Belarus are putting their strategic partnership back in the spotlight as Presidents Xi Jinping and Alexander Lukashenko meet in Beijing. The visit signals another push to deepen political, economic, and regional cooperation. Abu Hayat Jafarova reports from Beijing.
Chinese President Xi Jinping welcomed Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko to Beijing, describing China and Belarus as true friends and all-weather comprehensive strategic partners. Xi said bilateral ties have reached their strongest point in history, highlighting growing political trust, progress in Belt and Road cooperation, and successful coordination on international affairs. He also reaffirmed China's support for Belarus in safeguarding its sovereignty and pledged continued assistance for the country's development within China's capacity. President Lukashenko praised the practical cooperation between the two countries, saying it has made an important contribution to Belarus' economic and social development. He said Belarus is committed to expanding cooperation with China and strengthening coordination on regional and international issues, while also expressing support for China's global initiatives aimed at promoting peace, stability, and development. Abu Hayat Jafarova, A News, Beijing, China.
All right, after a short break, we'll take a look at more top stories of the day. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You are watching Primetime. Venezuela is racing against time after two powerful earthquakes left entire communities buried and thousands of families searching for loved ones. Days after the disaster, rescuers are still finding survivors, but fears are growing over how high the final toll could rise.
Search and rescue operations continue in Venezuela after two powerful earthquakes struck on the 24th of June. Interim President Delcy Rodriguez said 33 more people were pulled alive from the rubble over the weekend. However, the fate of tens of thousands of people remains unknown. Officials say the death toll has now reached nearly 1,500. The magnitude 7.2 and 7.5 earthquakes struck just 39 seconds apart, destroying nearly 800 buildings and trapping thousands of people. La Guaira has suffered the worst damage. Drone footage released on Sunday showed dozens of buildings reduced to rubble in the coastal state, about 40 kilometers north of Caracas. Families are continuing to search for missing relatives by hand. Many say they can hear voices beneath the debris, but there is not enough heavy machinery to lift the concrete. Thousands of people are still unable to return home. Many are sleeping in their cars, while others are staying in temporary shelters, including a golf course in Carabaleda that has been turned into a field hospital and humanitarian aid center. The Jose Maria Vargas Sports Complex in La Guaira is also being used as an emergency response center. The country's largest oil refinery has resumed operations and electricity has been restored to 75% of La Guaira. Meanwhile, authorities also say that water services are back to 68% and around 90% of the roads are now open. International support continues to grow. Rescue teams from Mexico, Spain, Qatar, the United States and the United Kingdom have joined the operation. The United Nations says there are 39 international search and rescue teams with around 2,000 rescuers, 111 search dogs, medical teams and specialized micro-drones are now working in Venezuela. The US Geological Survey estimates that the final death toll could exceed 10,000. If confirmed, the disaster would rank among the deadliest earthquakes in Latin America over the past century.
As Venezuela continues to assess the damage from last week's earthquakes, heavy rains have triggered new flooding in the western state of Portuguesa. Several areas were flooded after a river overflowed. 2 schools were affected and local officials reported around 350 people impacted. Authorities say response teams are assessing the damage and monitoring further risks from heavy rain. Other news now, Ukraine is facing another wave of deadly strikes as fighting intensifies and diplomacy remains stuck. With both sides trading battlefield claims and long-range attacks, the gap between ceasefire proposals and actual peace still appears wide.
Fresh strikes have caused multiple civilian casualties in southeastern Ukraine. In Dnipro, a Russian missile hit a local business, killing 5 people and wounding nearly 30. A fatal drone attack was also reported on a minibus in Zaporizhia. On the battlefield, Moscow claims advances in the Lyman and Konstantinivka directions, alongside northern operations in Sumy and Vovchansk to establish a security buffer. Conversely, Kiev's general staff reported responding with overnight long-range drone strikes targeting 2 Russian oil refineries and an ammunition depot. Amid the combat, Russian President Vladimir Putin disclosed that Kiev had proposed a mutual halt to long-range strikes and a localized freeze, an initiative Moscow dismissed.
There is a request to halt hostilities, at least briefly, along the line of contact. But there are also new proposals to stop strikes deep into each other's territory. It is clear why this proposal is being made, because our retaliatory strikes deep into Ukrainian territory are far more powerful.
Moscow maintains peace requires Ukraine to cede 4 claimed regions and drop its NATO bid. while Putin offered to resume strategic talks based on the 2025 Spirit of Anchorage. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio rejected the claim, stating no binding agreement was ever finalized. Kiev rejects these terms. Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha declared the Anchorage format dead, warning any peace framework designed without Ukraine will fail. Concurrently, President Volodymyr Zelensky pushed for faster EU membership talks.
Ukraine has already come a long way toward the European Union, and much has been built on this foundation. Negotiations on our membership have already begun. Clusters are already being opened.
On Monday, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov responded to the international pushback, stating Moscow's structural conditions remain entirely unchanged and well known to all negotiating parties.
And now for some tech news before we go. South Korea is making a major bet on the next industrial age, with chips and artificial intelligence at the center of its strategy. The plan is not just about technology, it's also about spreading growth beyond Seoul and securing influence in a global race for power.
South Korea aims to narrow regional disparities and revive economies beyond the Seoul metropolitan area with a major investment drive for semiconductors and artificial intelligence. President Lee Jae-myung unveiled his industrial strategy on Monday with an investment of $576 billion to develop a new chip production base in the country's southwest. The move is part of Seoul's 3 mega projects initiative, covering semiconductors, AI data centers, and physical artificial intelligence, including robotics. The project aims to turn Gwangju and the Jeolla region into the country's second major semiconductor cluster, alongside existing hubs around Seoul and Pyeongtaek. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix are expected to play a central role as Seoul pushes to strengthen its memory chip leadership and expand high-tech industry beyond the capital region. But South Korea's move is part of a much wider global race. Chips are tiny electronic components made from semiconductor materials, but their impact is enormous. They power everything from smartphones and electric vehicles to data centers, industrial robots, advanced weapons, and artificial intelligence. Modern chips can contain billions of transistors, some smaller than a virus, switching on and off billions of times per second. The AI boom has made the competition sharper because the most powerful systems depend on advanced processors and high-performance memory chips. The United States remains dominant in chip design, software tools, and core technology, while Taiwan leads in the most advanced contract manufacturing. South Korea is a global leader in memory chips, while China is investing heavily to reduce its reliance on foreign technology. Japan and the European Union are also trying to rebuild or expand domestic chip capacity after supply chain shocks exposed dependence on a small number of producers. This has turned semiconductors into a geopolitical issue. Chips now shape trade policy, export controls, defense planning, and the rivalry between Washington and Beijing. Governments increasingly see chip supply chains as strategic assets, not just commercial industries. For South Korea, the new investment is therefore not only about growth, it is about securing a place in the next phase of global technological power.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and join us again tomorrow. From all of us here at A News, have a very nice evening.